What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back with another 10-game NBA slate courtesy of Awesemo.com. There's a whole lot of games, and the disparity between the highest projected totaled game and the lowest is 36.5 points. There's going to be a lot of confusing things to navigate in this large slate today, so help me out. Like the video right now. Leave a comment down below. Tell me which guy who's going to be popular today you think is the most likely to blow up in everybody's faces. Do that right now. Who's going to be the TJ McConnell, the big winner, who is going to have all the people on him and is going to crush our souls? Do that right now. Like the video and leave that comment down below. First corner I wanted to hit on is a game with the Hawks visiting the Pelicans. This one is a slate high 240-point combined total and represents a 5.1 point boost for New Orleans and a very nice 6.9 point boost for the Hawks. Trae Young's 26% ownership is the highest projected in the game. He's had at least 11 assists in his last 3 games. He's also had upwards of 33%, 38% usage during that stretch. He's really getting a good situation here versus the Pelicans. I like Trae Young a bit. I think there's some risk with where his price is, but he definitely has a ceiling. He's shown us it before, so I don't mind Trae Young at all today. For John Collins, the pace and the space make him an intriguing option. Should be able to get some rim runs going, should be able to get some easy buckets as well as some boards. The risk, though, is really how he and Trae Young seem to siphon usage away from each other. During Trae's hot run, John Collins has been cold. When Trae was cold a couple weeks ago, John Collins was heating up. So I think I would only want to play one of Trae Young and John Collins on a lineup together, though the pace here does make it a little bit more palatable to get both in there. Dwayne Dedmon's been over 33.5 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games. There's still some risk that Alex Len takes minutes away from him. Alex Len's been in the high teens, low 20s minutes recently. He can be very productive in this spot going against the Pelicans' second unit, but Dwayne Dedmon looks like he's going to get that first crack, and it should be a good one. I will have some exposure to probably both those guys today because, again, this total's so high. Taurean Prince and Kevin Huerter could both have value on the wing. Taurean Prince looks like the steadier play, but Kevin Huerter did have a 40 fantasy point day on 11 for 18 shooting versus the Pelicans earlier this month. I think I would go Taurean Prince. He actually had a little bit more usage in that last spot as well for the Hawks, but I think Kevin Huerter is an interesting option. I think a little bit of exposure to both guys, not a ton because really neither has that reliable, crazy high ceiling, but a little bit of exposure to both works for me. Julius Randle's 17% expected ownership is the highest for New Orleans right now. The Pelicans have been blown out in their last 2 games, so it's hard to get a full read on what their run could be, but one would assume they're still going to get their full minutes, even though Randle hasn't played in the fourth quarter of the last 2 games. If he's going to play, he looks good. I think there's some risk, though, so I really wouldn't want to go too high above the field with where the ownership currently is expected to be. Elfrid Payton's had 2 really bad games in a row, and he's questionable right now. If he's out, Frank Jackson becomes a much better play, and if he's in, he's actually an interesting play himself. The point guard situation for whoever's going against Atlanta is going to be interesting, so if it's Frank Jackson or Elfrid Payton, I'll definitely want some exposure, but I think, again, muting your risk if it is Elfrid Payton does seem like a good approach. Kendrick Williams, Check Diallo, and Stanley Johnson are interesting value guys to me. Kendrick Williams, the most stable role. Check Diallo, to me, projects the best, but he didn't even play in the second half last game, so that's a concern. Stanley Johnson, not a ton of opportunity necessarily, but he's been getting low 20s minutes and been shooting, so maybe he can spike a ceiling in the right situation here, and an Atlanta matchup is probably the right situation. So these guys are a little interesting, hard to trust, though, so I don't really know what to make of them, but I think I'll probably have a little bit of these guys in some lineups. The next corner I want to hit on is the Wizards at the Lakers. This one is a 233.5 point combined total, which represents a 6.1 point boost for the Lakers and a 1.5 point boost for Washington. It seems like LeBron James's minutes cap has gone by the wayside. He's had at least 35 minutes in his last 3 games after he's talked about appeasing the basketball gods with his effort. To me, the important thing, though, his price is down. It's a nice matchup. His usage has been there, shooting at least 22 times in his last 7 games. So LeBron, to me, at $10,200 on DraftKings is a very interesting play. Rajon Rondo's had 17.25 and 23.75 fantasy points in his last 2 games alongside LeBron James. Not getting a ton of ball handling time, not seeing the assist upside or shooting upside. So Rajon Rondo seems like a fade to me, given that he's going to be at comparable ownership compared to LeBron and a few of the better plays on the Lakers side. JaVale McGee's not currently projected for much ownership after he's been priced up following a 72 fantasy point and 47 fantasy point day. He also had 5 and 6 blocks in those games, and the Wizards are only allowing 4.5 blocks per game, so you could see that number come down a bit. McGee, though, is still in a good spot for rebounding and points, but I think the block upside could go away, and that could decrease his margins with his price being up a pretty decent amount. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's price is up also a bit, but his usage should be there. He shot 15 times last game, including 12 from 3 versus Sacramento. Getting those looks here versus Washington would pay off a lot more for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, so I don't mind him here, and the usage should be there for him in this nice pace spot. Kyle Kuzma had 40 minutes last game, and he hasn't been terribly productive on a per-minute basis, but that kind of run's hard to ignore, especially in a situation here versus Washington, so I really don't mind Kyle Kuzma, but his price is up enough where I won't want to have a ton of exposure to him just because he hasn't shown a crazy high ceiling enough where I want to trust them at that level. And Lance Stevenson returned last game versus Sacramento. He got 24 minutes as a return to the lineup, so here against the Wizards, again, another pacey spot. Should be good for Lance. He's another value guy, so I think if we're going to talk about very chalky value guys, Lance to me is a pivot who does have some degree of upside. Thomas Bryant started the last 2 games and his 32% ownership is expected to be the highest in this game. He actually had his breakout day versus his former team, the Lakers, with 30.75 fantasy points in 28 minutes back in December. It's a nice spot for him again versus the Lakers. The run is there. He's getting mid-30s minutes. The opportunity is there for Thomas Bryant to have another nice day, so I think matching the field here, maybe even getting a little above it depending upon how your lineup construction works for me. Bobby Portis's minutes have been more secure playing alongside Thomas Bryant instead of competing against him. Jabari Parker's suffered more so I think Bobby Portis is actually an interesting play. Jabari Parker less interesting because he's losing the minutes, even though Trevor Reeves is not in the lineup. It's been a spot where they're playing a lot more Portis and Bryant together to see what they have, so I don't mind Bobby Portis here, and I do have to downgrade Jabari Parker with his price still up from his recent run of success. Tomas Satoransky's had 4 out of his last 5 games over 33.5 fantasy points. The pace here, the rebounding situation should all benefit him a decent amount. Also, the assist upside he should have because the Lakers defense is just not that good. It all works for Tomas Satoransky. This seems like it could be a potential triple-double spot for him, so I don't mind him despite his price coming up, but obviously not having a ton of exposure works for me because there's so many guys out there who are going to have big ceilings today. But I worry a little bit about Bradley Beal's ceiling. His minutes are down to the mid-30s, but his price hasn't come down quite enough. He can still be productive enough to get there. He is a fantastic shooter. He does push that usage up sometimes in matchups, so I don't mind Bradley Beal, but I think it's hard for me to get there with, again, so many options on the slate who we know have pretty high ceilings and more stable minutes loads because their teams are still actually in the playoff fight. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Clippers visiting the Wolves. This one is a 230-point combined total, which represents a 1.6-point boost for Minnesota and a 1.3-point boost for the Clippers. Karl-Anthony Towns at 71.25 fantasy points last game versus Memphis, and even though that team's a bit of a shell group of what they were earlier in the year, they are still a much tougher defense in this one versus the Clippers. Clippers are notoriously bad versus center for at least the last few months, so Towns here, all the usage to go around with no Teague out there, no Rose. Those guys are out for the year. It's a good spot for Towns again, and I really don't mind him at all in this match. I'll probably at least match the field on him, may even go above it. Andrew Wiggins is still involved enough to get there, but his price is up where it's really a tough squeeze for him. I don't mind Wiggins. I'm never really a huge Wiggins guy, so if you want to get some Wiggins in there, it's fine. The team total supports that, but overall, Andrew Wiggins not a guy I'm dying to get to. Tyus Jones and Josh Okogie, maybe more secure options than Wiggins at this point, with their prices a little bit cheaper. The performance not terribly far off. Okogie in particular has had 3 out of his last 4 games over 33 fantasy points. He could be another interesting pivot to some of the value out there. It's going to be very popular. So I really don't mind Tyus Jones or Josh Okogie. I think I'd lightly favor Josh Okogie. Danilo Gallinari's price is up again, but he shot 10 threes last game. If he did that again here versus the Wolves, it could be a lot more beneficial for him. I don't mind Danilo Gallinari for assuming this game stays close. He could be a big part of it. The usage is there from the opportunities there. Just the price makes it a little tough because he hasn't shown a crazy high ceiling for the most part this year. Lou Williams is now slightly cheaper than Montrezl Harrell on DraftKings, and with the Wolves allowing a slate high 37.7% from deep, I would slightly favor Lou here. I think at the ownership, though, you can get Montrezl at a lot less, so I get wanting a little bit taste of him, and he does have that upside. He has shown a good run of 40 fantasy point days plus before his most recent down 2 games, so I don't mind Harrell, but for me, Lou looks like the better play in this situation. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's had 5 straight games over 28 fantasy points, but he's been mostly priced out. His ceiling of 44.25 fantasy points for Chicago during this recent run would be nice, but it's hard to see him get there night after night, so I think with where his price is, it's not worth a ton of him, but again, he could spike that ceiling day because the Wolves just not that great defensively. And the last corner I want to hit on is a chalk extravaganza known as Bulls at Raptors. This one has a 219.5-point combined total, which represents a 2.2-point boost for Toronto and a 2.1-point drop for the Bulls. Shaq Harrison and Antonio Blakeney are both projected right now for 47% ownership. We're expected to have no Chris Dunn, no Zach LaVine, and no Otto Porter in the lineup, so the minutes, the usage is there to go around for them. Harrison's been a better play with those guys out. He's averaging 26 fantasy points in his last 3 starts. Blakeney's been pretty worse, but Dunn's been in there, so maybe him being out somehow gives Blakeney enough room to operate. I'm not as sure about Blakeney. I don't mind Harrison, though the ceiling's still not great, so I don't mind these guys, but honestly, I'll probably come a little bit underneath the field on them just because there's other value out there. It's a 10-game slate, concentrating that much ownership on 2 guys who are not that great and are in a tough defensive matchup doesn't seem like the best idea overall. Ryan Arcidiakono's 26% ownership seems a little bit more reasonable to me. He's played pretty well with no Dunn and no LaVine out there because he gets the assist upside and the shooting upside, so I don't mind Arcidiakono. I get wanting to go to the other guys. They're just a little more productive per minute, but Arcidiakono to me, less ownership, a little bit more of a steady guy, a little more competent all around. Makes me a little more interested in Arcidiakono. Lauri Markkanen showed his floor with all those guys out because he shot 6 for 20, put up just 34 fantasy points versus Utah. His price is not that high high because he hasn't been that good outside of the one big day he had versus Washington. This obviously isn't as good of a spot as it was versus Washington. Toronto, a much better defense, but Markkanen's usage is going to be there. If anything, it might even go up a little bit with Dunn out, so I don't mind going to Markkanen, but it wouldn't shock me if he just had a mediocre day. Kyle Lowry got 28 minutes in his return to the lineup, and he's reportedly at full health. His minutes were down a little bit in that game because the Raptors were getting blown out, then they weren't getting blown out, so the starters came back in. So Lowry is interesting to me if the Bulls are playing this close. I think he's got some assist upside because of how the Bulls defense is so bad. So I would play Lowry if I'm playing a bunch of Bulls, but I probably wouldn't be inclined to play him if I weren't. Kawhi Leonard's been one of the steadiest guys in the league, but the fact that there's some blowout risk and the fact that he doesn't ever put up that much of a super high ceiling game makes me worry a little bit about Kawhi. If the Bulls keep it close, that makes Kawhi more appealing. I don't mind him, but I think he really feels like more of a cash gameplay than a tournament one, unless you're loading up on Bulls on the other side. It's a nice spot for Pascal Siakam, but his price is up high enough that I wonder if it might just be worth going to Kawhi Leonard instead. Siakam's been a good play, and he does have some upside. He showed that gigantic ceiling he has versus the Thunder, but a spot like this, I wonder if it might just be better to take the safer guy. Kawhi Leonard, to me, is the safer guy. Pascal Siakam, though, does have some tournament interest. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on the slate, and I have a lot more thoughts in the link in the description down below. My column is Switch and Hedge at Osmo.com. I talk about every single game on there, even the really ugly ones, that terrible Orlando Magic and Miami Heat game. I talk about that in there. So click the link in the description right now and read some more. And as always, please do like the video and leave a comment down below. Tell me which guy you're the most freaked out about having on your lineups on tonight's slate. Every day, the support means a ton. I love having you guys in there. I love talking with you guys in the comments every day. So let's keep it going. Like the video right now and leave a comment. And do check the promo code Switch and Hedge. I'm dropping in right here. That'll give you half off your first month at Osmo.com. All the ownership projections and rankings. You can also get an all sport pass, so you get some NBA content and our MLB content, which is starting to trickle out right now. So check that out. Use that promo code. Get in there. A slate like this is really one where Osmo's rankings and the ownership projections will help out quite a bit. And I'll be back again tomorrow for another Four Corners video. So wish you guys the best of luck.